Hey there gardeners, Chris here from Steading, and I wanted to talk about whether you should plant a jacaranda as a long-term tree in your garden, because there are some quite amazing features to the jacaranda. However, there is a real problem, which is the old jacaranda jealousy, where there are a lot of people who now kind of hate the jacaranda and have a whole list of reasons why you shouldn't plant one. And to go even further than that, they think you shouldn't be allowed to plant one, particularly here in Australia, where obviously they're not native. So let's have a little bit of a talk about the topic from a more balanced perspective. So let's talk the jacaranda, and more specifically the advantages of planting one of these trees. Now, these are native to South America, I think quite a restricted kind of area to be honest, and they are quite drought tolerant once they're established, which is really good in Australia. They also grow really fast, which is probably a good thing for most people, although it does have some downsides. They have this really cool foliage, which is essentially almost fern-like, and they are called the fern tree. They're called the blue jacaranda, generally speaking, despite being purple from everywhere I've seen them. And I'm from Sydney, so I grew up with jacarandas all over the city. They are quite an iconic tree. However, they basically have quite a bad reputation. Now, some of those reasons are kind of minor inconveniences which we can work around. Some of them are more legitimate complaints. And then there is kind of the advantages, which is during the flowering season, they have just a profusion of purple flowers, which just look absolutely amazing. Or if you've got a white Christmas jacaranda like this one here, it's white, which is probably even more special. I've only ever seen two, to be honest. One when we bought this property and we found this one flowering quite unusually, and there's another one in town, which may be where this came from. But the reality is that most of them are going to have this enormous coverage in purple flowers, and they grow on these big clumps of flowers like this, which have a special name, which I have forgotten. And essentially you get these big bunches of flowers, and they're beautiful. And normally what happens is the tree drops all of its leaves, and then you get all your flowers, and then after that, it will put back on its green growth. And you do have a period of no leaves, which varies greatly. These are kind of a subtropic to tropic tree, probably down into even the temperate, because in Sydney it's more temperate, I would say, and they grow very well there. They're very well established, and you see them all over the city and lots of suburbs. So they are a bit of an iconic kind of tree in some ways. The one thing I will say is the downsides are sometimes quite significant. Now in the suburbs, obviously these are grown along verges, along footpaths, and when they drop their flowers, which I've got a bit of footage of, they just drop a carpet of flowers, and particularly on hard surfaces, but even on grass, it can be quite slippery because they kind of break down. They're a little bit on the dangerous side, but to be honest, I think that if we're really fair, we can work around that. There's lots and lots of trees which have disadvantages of that manner that just require a bit of cleanup. And so maybe that does mean that councils need to be a little bit more active in the street cleaning and things like that, or the people who live nearby do need to clean up a little bit. But again, a little bit of civic responsibility goes a long way instead of just banning everything outright, which is the modern trend. Now, other kind of probably more significant reasons that you might need to be careful about one of these trees is because, as I said, they grow fast and they're quite weedy in that manner. They have invasive roots, so that can be an issue with your footpaths or obviously with water pipes and things like that. And that could be a more significant reason as to why you don't plant one, or why you plant one in a location that is not going to be affected by that. So keep that in mind. They grow to 15 or 20 meters, so they are on the large side, and again, that means you're getting an enormous tree. Like the ones we've got here, I would say are 15 to 20 meters tall. We're in the subtropics. One of our trees lost all of its leaves, put on the flowers, put on the green growth. The other tree, which is 10 meters from the first one, it did not drop its leaves. We had a little bit of leaf fall, but realistically speaking, it stayed green. It put on even more flowers, and they were both very prolific this flowering season, which normally brings in lots and lots of insects, but to be honest, this year we just haven't seen a lot of insects in general at all, which is a little bit scary. The birds do love them though, especially we've got quite a lot of native miners. We've seen some parrots in them as well, parakeets, and yeah, rainbow lorikeets as well, and some bigger parrots, but they are a very nice looking tree. One thing that I did actually notice personally, and I've seen mentioned online, is because these leaves are this fern-like leaf, the leaves themselves are under a centimetre long and probably, I don't know, 4 mil wide. They go through gutter guard like anything. And we've got quite a dense gutter guard and they still get through that. And if they are near your house, that will be a considerable issue. Now for us, during the time of year when they really drop leaves, I do need to clean out those gutters with a pressure washer fairly frequently, but it's not that bad of a job, I wouldn't say. However, if you're someone who can't get up on your roof and clean them and you don't want the expense of having to pay for that kind of upkeep, then they're probably a great tree to avoid, because them getting through the gutter guard in that manner is something quite unusual compared to most of the trees that we have, especially here in Australia, which have a much larger leaf. Now, one of the very annoying features of the Jacaranda is that they do drop a very, very annoying seed pod. And the seed pod itself is quite hard. It's roundish and it has almost like oyster styled edges, which make it quite sharp. It can be pretty horrible to step on. Going through the mower, it's pretty awful as well. And even worse than those two things is that those seed pods grow like anything. And so you get a lot of seedlings from these trees. Now, I personally haven't seen any birds taking those seed pods and spreading them around, which isn't to say it doesn't happen at all. However, most of the spread of these trees seems to be pretty directly under them and in the adjacent area where those seed pods land. And if you're cleaning up those seed pods, it is, again, quite the pain. It's not a terrible kind of thing to have to do, but you will want to be pretty proactive with them to get them out of your garden unless you want a whole heap more jacarandas. Now, obviously, these do outcompete most Australian natives, which tend to be slower growers. And while some people say that they just shouldn't be allowed for that reason, I'm not really sure that I agree with that logic. I think there is a pretty puritanical approach to really trying to kind of take this idea that anything that isn't really native to not only your country but your area is just a weed and shouldn't be allowed and all this kind of stuff. You know, that is, as I said, a very, very puritanical view, which I don't think really adds much to the debate. There are probably some arguments in very, very special ecological areas that you want to protect that should be the case, but more generally I think people just take that way, way too far, which is a little bit sad. But with the polarized way the internet works, it's not surprising we see so many people taking that kind of tack when they talk about these topics. Now, if you do have a white jacaranda or a Christmas jacaranda, as I've already mentioned they're called, or an alba jacaranda, they will revert if you grow from the seed of one of these to a purple jacaranda. And I kind of thought to myself, wow, I've got this white jacaranda here, I'm going to grow a whole heap of seedlings from it, it is going to be awesome, and I'll sell white jacarandas, I'm going to be rich. Apparently not, but normally they are grafted, so keep that in mind if you're buying one and you're looking for one. They do seem to be quite available, and obviously, again, depending on what location you're in, depends on probably whether you should consider the local ordinances as to whether you should plant them or they're considered a dangerous weed or anything like that. And yeah, do a bit of research and obviously use your judgment. So, do you reckon a jacaranda is the perfect plant for your garden, or have you succumbed to the jacaranda jealousy and decided that they are a noxious weed that shouldn't be allowed anywhere in Australia or wherever you are, because you could be anywhere in the world? Personally, I've got two surrounding my house, very, very close, which do offer quite a nice kind of tree break between other trees. And I gotta say, I probably wouldn't be removing them because, again, I do feel like they play a really nice part in protecting the house in various ways. The white jacaranda is particularly special just because it's so different. It is really, really striking. This one is quite stringy. I think before we bought the property, it had been cut right back, and as a result, it's regrown in quite a strange way. However, it is a beautiful addition to the garden, and to be honest, if I was putting a single jacaranda in, I'd probably put a white jacaranda just because it's something a little bit different. And I like that, but that's just me. So if you're thinking about putting one of these in, definitely do your research, have a good think about it, be smart and strategic with where you're placing it, and I think there's probably a good chance that you might be able to fit one of these in if you've got the space.